Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Aman Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going to be going and discussing the early draw for the 2025 NRL calendar, looking at teams who may have the best matchups in the opening kind of 4 to 6 rounds, but also having a bit of strategic talk around how much weight do you put into the draw at the early stages of the season. If you are a new viewer to the channel, would really appreciate if you give a thumbs up on the video and do subscribe as well if you want to see more content throughout the entire 2025 season. We're on the way to 5,000, so getting to that target before the start of the year would be absolutely amazing. Please also, if you're listening to this on Spotify or any other audio platform, do rate it 5 stars. That really just does help get the word out there to anyone else who is starting to look at their teams and for SuperCoach 2025. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So I wanted to start off with actually looking at who are the teams that we would consider as easy opponents. And I think the big thing that we always need to caveat, especially coming into a new year, as I mentioned in the intro, a lot of these teams do have really big new key signings, or they've lost a lot of players, or they've got new coaches. You know, a team like the Rabbitohs jumps to mind, who have now got Wayne Bennett back at the helm. Just taking a look at the graphic below, so this is looking at teams who conceded scores over 80 points the most number of times in the 2024 season. And not surprising, I guess, some of the names, featuring at the top end there, you've got the West Tigers and then the Parramatta Eels. Both had pretty poor seasons last year. The Tigers have been, the weakest team in the comp for the last few years. I'm sorry to say it, Tigers fans. So they were the weakest opposition in terms of points conceded, over 80 points. Parramatta coming in second. Some surprising names like the Canberra Raiders, who we kind of always associate as a grittier opposition. They were actually ranked third highest. Then you got some more, probably, a team that you'd probably expect, like the Gold Coast Titans, who do concede a fair amount of points, and then the Rabbitohs, who obviously had a pretty poor 2024 season. One thing, that we need to look at is the teams that we saw had pretty poor years last year. Are they going to replicate the same coming into 2025? Souths jump out immediately as someone who you think with Wayne Bennett back, they shouldn't be as bad as they were last season. So you always need to put a little bit of your own judgment rather than looking straight at the numbers. If we work our way down towards the list, another team that does jump out here is the Broncos. So they're kind of mid-table in terms of points conceded. They were the 2023 grand finalists, really bad 2024. You'd have to think that they have the ability to bounce back in 2025. So just because they're kind of ranking towards mid to higher end of the points conceded table, I don't look at them coming into the start of 2025 thinking that's a team that I should be looking at as a juicy matchup, because we know that the Broncos are a really good team on their day. And, with a new coach now as well, things could be a little bit better for them. Looking at the more difficult opposition, I think most of these names you could expect to still be there for 2025. So I still think it is worth looking at this set of teams and thinking, yeah, I really don't want my players coming up against them if I can avoid it, particularly attacking players. Penrith number 1 defense last year from a SuperCoach points conceded point of view, that makes total sense. 4 times premiers. I mean, everything's been said about the Penrith Panthers and the dynasty that they're in at the moment, but incredible defense. Sharks and Melbourne coming in as the second and third kind of tightest defenses from a SuperCoach point of view. So that also checks out. They've been pretty stingy defenses in the last few years, not just 2024. Roosters in fourth is interesting because they had a really good season last year, but they have lost a lot of key players. So you look at Roosters and think, early stages of the season when they're still figuring out new combinations, they don't have Luke Keary anymore, Sam Walker's out injured, Joey Manu's gone, Joseph Suaalii is gone. There's a couple of others, Terrell May has also left the club. There's a lot of players who've left that Roosters side, and I do think it's going to take some time for them to figure it out. So while they were really good last year from a defensive point of view, maybe early season, you don't have to be so worried about them. Bulldogs rounding up the top 5 there as well. And then a few teams in the middle, Cowboys, Newcastle, Manly, Dragons, and the Warriors. So I think this shouldn't be a surprise to people when they look at it, considering how a lot of these teams performed last year. But I do want to call out the likes of the Rabbitohs, the Broncos, the Roosters. Those are 3 teams who I do look at. You could even throw the Cowboys into there. They've had a few key players leave, like Val Holmes. A few teams in there that I think their trajectory could be a little bit different for 2025. So we just need to weigh that into our thinking when looking at players and teams to target for the early parts of the season. So in this next section, what I wanted to look at is more from a strategic point of view. Before even looking at the teams and their draws and the ones that we want to target, how much weight do you actually put in the early part of the season when we're still figuring out a lot of things, and a lot of things have changed with a lot of the teams. So what the graphic I've got here, me being a numbers person, there's always a lot of discussion in the community around, scoring is generally lower in the early parts of the season. I wanted to see if the stats back that argument up, and I would say generally that they do. So what you're looking at on the screen here over the last 3 seasons, 2024, 2023, and 2022. And the bracketed number under each of those years is the average number of SuperCoach points scored on average per team. So what you look at is when you look at the SuperCoach points scored in a single game, on average, it was around 833 that was scored by one team and then obviously conceded by the opposition. So then what I've done is I've looked at rounds 1 to 6 in each of the 3 seasons, and I've seen in each of those rounds what was the average points scored, and then how did that differ to the entire season's average. So what you can see from 2024, first 4 rounds, every score on average was lower than the season average, and by a fair margin, minus 53 points in round 1. It's a similar story as well in 2023, where the first 4 rounds of the year, every score on average was less than the entire season's average per game. 2022 even more so, where the entire first 6 rounds of the season were all on average below scoring compared to the entire season average. In particular, if you look at even rounds 1 and rounds 2, the variances are probably the biggest that you'd see compared to the entire season average. So I think what this really does reaffirm is that while there might be good matchups in the opening rounds, I'm trying to, and this is more a lesson for myself and hopefully one that I can share with you all out there too, putting a little bit less stock into the early draw because teams are still figuring it out. And on average, the scoring is lower, and these numbers do back it up. So I hope that you found this kind of graphic useful. And I guess what that tells me is that while we now are going to look at teams and good matchups, because it's still important, I'm not going to let it fully dictate my thinking how I have had it done in previous years, where I've really probably paid too much attention to the draw at the beginning. What doing this numbers exercise has also told me though is on average around rounds 5 to 6, that's when you do see the scoring start to kick in a little bit, and that makes complete sense. Teams have started figuring out combinations a little bit, and at that point is probably when we can really start to identify the teams that are weaker in terms of conceding points. So what I wanted to show in the next couple of screens, so what you're looking at here is the draw from rounds 1 to 4, and it's sorted by difficulty, so best draw down to the worst. And then what I've got a little bit later is rounds 5 till 10. The reason I wanted to look at then rounds 5 to 10 is because based on what I just showed previously, round 5 is about the time you start seeing the combinations kick in. And so I wanted to see at that point, what are the teams that actually start going on their good runs? That will also then inform who I pick. You know, if I look at this particular screen here, Cronulla Sharks are the highest rated team from rounds 5 to rounds 10, but they were pretty low down when it came to round 1 to 4. That automatically makes me think if I'm kind of choosing a halfback, maybe Nico Hines is someone who I just plug in. Maybe the first 4 rounds aren't the best, but I know that by round 5, I've got him ready to go in place for what's going to be a better run. And at that point, the scoring should be on a general uptick. Similar with Melbourne, they've got a fairly tough start to the year. They do have a bye as well early on, but then their draw really does open up. So maybe if you're really umming and ahhing about a 5/8, maybe you just stick Cameron Munster in there. So I won't go through this entire table in detail, but this does kind of inform a lot of my thinking, and you'll probably see this more in my initial team reveal, which I'll put in another video, hopefully not too much longer after posting this one. But looking at the rounds 5 to 10 actually really factored into my thinking when it came to picking some of my players, especially some of the higher priced guns who you kind of want to put in as set and forget picks. Someone from the Sharks like Nico Hines, someone from Newcastle maybe like Kalen Ponga, who actually does have a pretty good start to the year as well. I'm starting to look at these things in terms of how to help shape my team selection. So looking at the very first team that probably on paper has the best draw to begin the year, and that is the West Tigers. Bit of an interesting one here with the Tigers. They've obviously got a lot of new players in, the likes of Terrell May, Jerome Luai, Sunia Turuva, just to name a few there. But they've got some interesting SuperCoach options as well. Very good start to the year on paper. Newcastle, Parramatta, Dolphins, Warriors at home, Broncos, and then the Knights. The only thing I'm just doing with the West Tigers is trying to cool my jets a little bit, because they've got a lot of good looking options in terms of prices, but they are a team that has so much change. There's going to be a lot of time, I think, to figure out things for them. And so as much as I can, I just want to not over-invest in them if I can avoid it, just because I know that, you know, they have been a struggling team. While the early draw is good, I don't want to just go fully invest and say, yep, Sunia Turuva is the one I want. I'm 100% locky in someone like a Jerome Luai. They do have some good value picks. Like I'm pretty sure you'll see Terrell May in almost every preseason squad. But the likes of Jack Bird, you know, he's 380k. If he gets a starting lock position available in the centres, that's a little bit different because he's at a pretty affordable price. You know, but going in and spending big money on like Coruscant, Luai, Lockie Galvin again, because he had a great season last year. You know, I think all I'd say with the Tigers, while the draw is good on paper, probably cooling it a little bit in terms of how much I want to invest in them if I can. Just explaining the graphic really quick. So what I've got numbers below each of the opponent teams is their ranking in terms of SuperCoach points conceded from the previous year. So for instance, if we look at Parramatta, 17th, they actually conceded the most SuperCoach points conceded over the entire season. And so that's informed the numbers. So typically what you want to see here, just looking at it, is higher number, the better. But that's kind of my little thoughts on the West Tigers. I think Terrell May you will see in a lot of teams. He's currently in my preseason team, which I will reveal shortly. Not in this video, but in another video. Jack Bird could be good value. Luai could just potentially be an option because 5'8" is a pretty weak spot. But apart from that, I don't think I want to be over-investing in the Tigers, even though the draw on paper does look pretty good. Next up is the Dolphins. Somewhat similar narrative I have with them as I do with the West Tigers. They obviously don't have Wayne Bennett now coaching, and he was obviously tremendous for them in their first 2 years in the NRL. They also have a few decent options in terms of value picks. Max Plath was really good last year. He's at 618k, available at second row forward and hooker. I mean, for him, draw doesn't really matter so much. It's more your attacking players that you're probably looking at here. So you're thinking maybe the likes of Herbie Farnworth, Jermaine Isako, Hamiso Tabuai Fido. The Hammer's only available at fullback now, so that makes him a little bit less attractive of an option. Isako had a bit of a down year compared to 2023. And they're a really interesting team where I think the numbers suggest a very good draw on paper. But when I look at the teams more individually, it feels a little bit more difficult to draw because I look at the Rabbitohs round one. We know that the Rabbitohs have now got Wayne Bennett back at their helm. So I automatically think that that's just not going to be as easy as it was in 2024. Newcastle away could be decent. West Tigers at home probably is going to be a good matchup. Then you've got the Broncos, local derby, probably Broncos out for revenge for pretty bad 2024. Titans away, not bad, but then you've got Penrith again. So there are a few matchups, particularly the Penrith, Broncos and Rabbitohs ones that I look at as a little bit more dicey. Other games aren't too bad. But I think because I see a lot of their attackers either maybe not quite fitting in with squad structure, maybe like a Hammer, or maybe someone like a Herbie Farnworth who had a 74 average from last year, but having to cost you an arm and a leg at 728k. Just with a few dicey games and with scoring in general being lower in those opening rounds, I'm probably not looking too much at their attacking players. There's more interest probably in their forwards like Max Plath. Jeremy Marshall-King could be an option at hooker. 555k is not a bad price. He had some injuries last year, but coming into last year, he was viewed as probably the or the main alternative to Harry Grant if you wanted to spend up. So he's not at a bad price with maybe some decent attacking fixtures mixed in there. And then you got Finifuyaki, who's moved across from the Cowboys, who at 368k, again, draw isn't as important for the likes of back rowers and middle forwards. So at his price, he could actually offer good value, and at least it's nice to know that if you rolled him out in round 3 and he managed to score a meat pie or two against the Tigers, then all of a sudden his price is going to be going up, and that's kind of what you want at the early stages of the year. So yeah, similar to the Tigers, I'm probably not looking to overly invest in the Dolphins despite the draw being good on paper. If anything, I'm probably just going to be looking more at their forwards rather than the backs. Next up, I've got the Newcastle Knights. They're a very interesting team, the Knights, because I think they've got really good Supercoach options on paper, but they're just a very inconsistent team at times, and they kind of just scraped into 8th last year, but a lot of the last season they weren't even in the top 8. Kalen Ponga is the main man that sticks out. He's goal kicking, sub 800k. In 2023, he had an absolutely amazing Supercoach year. So coming in at sub 800k after, you'd say, a quiet year, still averaging 80.7, it's not a bad price. And with really good matchups thrown into the first 6 weeks, you got the Tigers twice, rounds 1 and round 6. That looks pretty good. Dolphins at home and the Titans in round 3. I do think that the Knights probably have got the highest potential with some of those games in the opening 6 weeks. Just playing the Tigers twice, Dolphins and Titans, those are teams that do like to concede points. The difficulty with them will be rounds 4 and rounds 5, because round 4 they do have a bye. Round 5 they've got the Bulldogs away, and we saw how good the Bulldogs were defensively last year. So I think there are a good enough set of matches there that someone like Ponga, he's currently in my initial squad, just because I think with him goal kicking, I know that scoring is lower in the opening rounds, but there are some matchups there that I think I could potentially want to captain him. I'll look at round 6, for example. If the Tigers haven't quite sorted things out, he's playing them at home, maybe then the Knights have figured things out. I might just want to stick the armband on Ponga. He is someone who can still score big, even against tougher opposition as well. Now with that, you've got the flex position thrown into Supercoach for 2025. I think navigating the buyers weeks are going to be a little bit easier as well. Like if you go down the route of having 3 gun fullbacks, yes, Ponga might be on the buy in round 4, but you still got 2 gun fullbacks that you can slot into your team, which, in previous years, if you only had the 2 fullbacks and you missed out on one of them because they're on a buy, you only get the one. So I think you're still in a position this year to still be able to gain good points just because what that flex position allows you in being able to accommodate 3 gun fullbacks. So Ponga is very interesting. Gagai has been rock solid for the last couple of years, 71 average from last year, but I think just with the inconsistency of the Knights and you just don't quite know how they're going to go, he feels a bit expensive for me to want to invest in at the early stages. Marzu, I think, is kind of trial dependent. If we see good things from him, he is at a nice price at 514k, 52.5 average last year. We saw the year before that he was averaging around, 73. A name that I haven't put on this list here is also like a Dylan Lucas. He was someone who last year, whether he was playing back row or center, he just seems to be having a very friendly SuperCoach game. So with a good draw as well, I can't remember the price off the top of my head, but he could also be someone to consider. Ponga's the main man, I think, from the Knights. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself all the time, but a little bit cautious, I guess, with how much I want to invest in the Knights because they just don't, especially in the halves. The halves was always chopping and changing for them, and as of the time of recording, mid-January, we still don't quite know what the combination will be. But Ponga does look tempting, and if we see good things from Marzu in the trials, he could also make into a lot of preseason teams. A team that I do feel a little bit more confident in investing in the early parts of the season is the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. Obviously a fantastic 2024 season, coming in at 6th place, one of the best defenses in the comp. They've got a lot of interesting options. The likes of Jacob Kiraz at centre wing automatically stands out. While he's very expensive at 703k, there are some nice matchups in the opening weeks, like the Dragons away, a little bit questionable, just because the Dragons have also got themselves a lot of new recruits. But Titans at home in round 2, Parramatta, even if Parramatta improve, even previous years, even when they made it all the way to the grand final, they're just not a team who I think defense seems to be the ultimate priority. I think that the priority seems to be attacking football, scoring points, and then hopefully just outscore the opposition. So that looks like a good game for Kirazis, particularly if he is able to be playing on the wing. Sharks away is obviously tough, but then it's the Knights at home. Then it's a bye in round 6. So it gets a little bit tougher from round 4. The reason I'm just confident in someone like Kiraz though is because he's just got such good base and base power stats that in any given week, even if he gets no attacking stats, he can still knock out 50 to 55, if not a 60. He doesn't need much to be able to get into those kind of 90 to 100 scores. Just quickly flicking back as well to the rounds 5 to 10 bracket. So one thing I like with someone like a Kiraz, if you want to stick with him from round 1, you just know you're kind of getting a set and forget option just because he's so rock solid. And from round 5, the rankings do go up a little bit in terms of the draw. South Broncos will be a little bit tougher around 7-8, but then you do run into the Titans again, then Canberra. I think it's just overall what I'm looking at here is a decent team with a very rock solid option in Kiraz. I think you can probably say the same for someone like a Matt Burton. So Burton is coming in at 650k with this average of 66. He didn't necessarily show a huge ceiling last year. I think he only scored over 100 a handful of times, but because he's the goal kicker for an improving team, you just know that he's generally going to be pretty safe for you. He's priced at probably about value, so he's probably not someone who I think you're going to be looking at to be generating cash for you, but it's more because the 5-8 position is a little bit weak. He's someone that you can just stick in and know that the overall draw for the kind of opening 1 to 10 rounds, it's just not that bad. So you know that he can just be a solid, reliable option for you, and you don't need to waste trading in and out of that particular player. So those two stand out as decent options from the Bulldogs. They do also have potential cheapies like Amon, who could be a bench front row forward, but draw is less relevant for him. Thinking more of the attacking players here like Kiraz and Matt Burton, I'm very keen on Kiraz. I've gotten Stephen Crichton written here as well. He's probably wasn't the most Supercoach relevant last year, just with an average of 52.9. He is very try-reliant to be able to average above the 60s. We kind of saw that at Penrith. But, if you really, if you're a Bulldogs fan and you just love what he's brought to the club, then sure, pay 517k for him. It probably won't be an option for me. A couple of forwards as well, like a Jacob Preston. If you're looking to spend up a little bit in your second row, he is someone who can generally get his hands on a few attacking stats. He's a bit of a try scorer, so he's also a worthwhile option to consider. And Max King, an ever reliable option in your front row with an average of 58 from last year. The final team that I kind of wanted to look in a little bit more detail were the Manly Sea Eagles. And I think you'll see in a lot of preseason teams, whether you have access to the team picker right now or you're watching this come post around Australia Day, which is when the game should be opening for the general public, Tom Trbojevic you're going to see in a lot of preseason teams. And I think that's for a very good reason. He's currently in mine. He's very expensive, 876k with an average of 89. But you kind of think it's an 89 average at times when you thought Tom wasn't like overly impressive at points last year. we know that this guy's potential is off the scales. Like we saw that 2021 year, which probably will never be matched again in SuperCoach when he averaged like 140. He's someone that you can easily see having a similar year to Tedesco, averaging around that 90, mid-90s mark, especially with injuries if he can remain free of those. Matchups wise, I really like what Manly have got in the opening 6 rounds. We've got Cowboys at home, Canberra, Parramatta all at home, and Melbourne too. We just know in general that Manly are a team that when they play at home at Brookvale, they're just much better for SuperCoach and just in general NRL wise. So Turbo feels like someone who I think come round 3-4 could be a strong captain option. He's just one of those guys that if he remains free of injuries and is on form, he's just unstoppable from a SuperCoach point of view. So I think you're going to see him in a lot of teams. And yeah, spoiler alert, he's currently in my preseason team as well. If you wanted to add someone else, you could also get like a Ruben Garrick. He's actually coming in cheaper than Karaz, and I'd argue with those home games, goal kicking, he could actually be potentially a better option than Karaz as well as a gun center wing to start with in your squads, just because of all these home games that he's got. I also think he's one who's potentially undervalued because he's 680k and that was averaging 69.5. But you have to remember he had some games last year where, I'm pretty sure that I can remember a game where I'm pretty sure I captained him and he got concussed twice. And he went on to score like 14 points in that game. He's got some injury affected games from last year that are really, I think, lowering that average. I think Garrick injury free is more of a kind of mid 70s averaging center. So you could actually be getting Garrick at value, and he would probably, in my opinion, be a bit of a point of difference to begin the year, just because I think that 680k price tag, people will struggle to get that in their teams when I know people are going to want to be trying to get 3 gun fullbacks. So I don't mind having the double up of Turbo and Garrick just with some good home games in the opening rounds. One particular downside probably of this double up is if you actually look at the rounds 5 to 10 ticker, that's when the draw really does toughen up for Manly. You've got Melbourne, Sharks, Dragons, Penrith, and then a bye, and then the Sharks again. So yeah, you can probably make an argument that the double up might only be worthwhile for the first 5 rounds. Maybe after that you sell out of Garrick, and maybe you do, if you're looking at the ticker here, if you want to invest in maybe a Sharks back center wing, you can get someone like a Kale Iro, who was good from last year. Maybe at that point of view, the Dragons look pretty good in attack. Round 5, you can see someone like a Val Holmes maybe being a very popular option because he then goes on a good run, and it's at a point where maybe the Dragons have worked out some combinations and things. So Turbo is one of those guys though, he's a bit matchup proof, so you can almost just stick with him and leave him. But even then, if you wanted to trade out of Turbo in round 5, you've got plenty of options in the fullbacks. You can go to Ponga in round 5 or round 6 when he's got the Tigers. Looking at some of the other names here, you can go to Pappenhausen from Melbourne, who's ranked high up here as well. Or you could go down to Iongi. If Iongi looks really good from Parramatta, you can free up bulk cash. So you've got some flexibility as well by picking the likes of Turbo and Garrick. One more value option, I guess, would be Lachlan Croker. Look, draw's not as relevant for him, but he's 334k, so you could maybe potentially consider him if you're looking to go a little bit cheaper in the hooker spot. If you're looking to pay up a bit in your second row, you've got Olakwatu, who I think is just generally a very rock solid option. You can't really go too wrong with him. And then you've got Cherry Evans, who, I think because you've got the likes of Cleary and Hines and Jerome Hughes, who I think are all just better prospects at halfback, I think Cherry Evans is probably not going to be someone who I'd be considering myself. And I think I'd be looking at more of those kind of, the Cleary Hines for sure. Jerome Hughes, Melbourne's draw is a little bit tough to begin with. But yeah, Cherry Evans you probably won't see, I think, in a lot of teams. But yeah, I think Turbo for sure, just because of what rounds 1 to 4 looks like, I think you'll see him be a very popular pick for round 1. Well, that's it, guys. Hope you all enjoyed that video, taking a look at the early draw, some of the teams that I think have got decent draws on paper, but also having a little bit of insight into the early parts of the year and the scoring rates compared to the entire season average. If you did enjoy this video, do please give it a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing as well if you haven't already. As I mentioned, ideally the target is to get to 5,000 before the start of round 1. If you're listening on audio, please do rate it. Go follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram and all my socials. But thank you all for watching, and see you in the next one.